They never warned you that some battles would begin long before you were born, that the weight you feel in quiet moments, the tension in your chest when nothing is wrong, the exhaustion that arrives without explanation, might not be yours alone. Families pass down names, traditions, and stories with pride, but there is another inheritance, one rarely spoken of, quietly transferred through glances, silences, expectations, and unhealed wounds. You grew up inside patterns you did not design, learning rules that were never explained, adapting to emotional climates that shifted without warning. What you called normal was often survival dressed as tradition, and so you learned to endure before you learned to feel, to perform before you learned to rest, to stay silent before you learned to speak. This is not a story about blame, and it is not a story about hatred. It is a story about awareness. Because the moment you recognize what was passed down without your consent, you step out of unconscious repetition and into choice. Tonight, we are not here to accuse the past. We are here to understand it. And in understanding it, to decide consciously, calmly, and courageously what ends with us. The silent inheritance. There are things a child learns without ever being taught. No lessons are spoken, no rules are written, yet the understanding settles deep into the nervous system long before language can explain it. This is how the silent inheritance begins, not through cruelty, not through intention, but through atmosphere, through the tone of a room when someone speaks their truth and the air suddenly tightens, through the way emotions are acknowledged one moment and dismissed the next, through the unspoken agreement that some feelings are acceptable while others must be quietly carried alone. Children do not analyze these moments, they absorb them. They adapt not because they are weak, but because adaptation is how the young stay connected to those they depend on. Over time, what began as awareness becomes instinct, and instinct becomes identity. In many families, silence is mistaken for peace. Calm rooms are praised, quiet children are admired, and emotional restraint is rewarded as maturity. But beneath this surface, stillness often lives an unaddressed tension, passed down gently, almost invisibly, from one generation to the next. A grandparent learned to suppress emotion to survive difficulty. A parent inherited that suppression and called it strength, and the child inherited it again, mistaking emotional distance for normalcy. This is how silence becomes tradition, not because anyone planned it, but because no one questioned it. And when silence rules a household, feelings do not disappear. They simply learn to hide, waiting for safer ground that rarely arrives. The silent inheritance does not always feel painful at first. Often it feels like responsibility, like maturity beyond years, like being the strong one, the understanding one, the one who doesn't cause trouble. Children who carry this inheritance learn to read rooms instead of expressing needs. They become skilled observers, measuring moods, adjusting their tone, shrinking or expanding themselves to maintain balance. Their emotional intelligence develops early, but at a cost. Their own inner voice grows faint. They sense what others need long before they know what they themselves feel. And this ability, praised by adults, quietly becomes a lifelong pattern of self-neglect disguised as reliability. As years pass, the inheritance deepens. The child grows into an adult who struggles to name their own emotions, not because they lack depth, but because depth was never welcomed. They may feel discomfort when expressing vulnerability, guilt when resting, anxiety when choosing themselves. Their body reacts before their mind understands why. This is the legacy of unspoken rules. Do not feel too much. Do not ask too loudly. Do not disrupt the emotional order. These rules were never announced, yet breaking them feels like betrayal. The adult wonders why closeness feels risky, why peace feels unfamiliar, why silence feels safer than honesty. The answer is not weakness, it is conditioning. What makes the silent inheritance so powerful is that it hides behind good intentions. Parents often believe they are protecting their children by shielding them from emotional weight, never realizing that what remains unspoken still leaves an imprint. Love exists, but it is expressed through duty rather than presence, through provision rather than understanding. The child grows up knowing they are cared for, yet unsure if they are truly known. And this confusion becomes the foundation of many adult relationships where affection is given, but emotional safety feels uncertain. The inheritance repeats, not through harm, but through habit. Breaking awareness of this pattern can feel unsettling. When silence has been your native language, learning to speak feels dangerous. The moment you begin to question what you absorbed, loyalty feels challenged. You may wonder if recognizing the inheritance means rejecting those who passed it down. It does not. Understanding is not accusation. Awareness is not disrespect. Recognizing the silent inheritance is an act of maturity, the ability to hold truth and compassion in the same space, to see that those before you did the best they could with the awareness they had while still choosing to do differently now. The most profound shift begins when you realize that what you carry does not have to define what you pass on. The inheritance loses its grip the moment it is named. When silence is replaced with honest reflection, when emotional presence becomes intentional rather than accidental, when rest is allowed without guilt. This is not a dramatic rebellion, it is a quiet recalibration, a decision to pause instead of repeat, to respond instead of react, to offer yourself what was never modeled, without bitterness and without blame. The silent inheritance ends not with confrontation, but with consciousness, with the courage to sit with your own feelings long enough to understand them, with the patience to learn a new emotional language at a pace that feels safe, with the strength to choose clarity over comfort even when silence feels easier. When one person in a lineage learns to feel without fear, to speak without apology, and to exist without shrinking, the inheritance changes. And from that moment on, what is passed down is no longer unspoken survival, but chosen awareness. When survival becomes a tradition, every family has a chapter it rarely revisits. The time when survival demanded sacrifice, a period shaped by scarcity, loss, instability, or fear, when emotional softness felt like a liability and endurance became the highest virtue. In those moments, families learned to stay alert, to stay controlled, to stay ready. These lessons were necessary then. They kept people standing when the ground beneath them was uncertain. But what once protected a family can quietly become its longest shadow. When survival is no longer required, the habits remain. They are passed down not as history, but as expectation. And slowly, survival stops being a response to circumstances and starts becoming a way of life. Children born into such families do not inherit the original danger, but they inherit the posture. They grow up sensing that rest is undeserved, that comfort must be earned, that joy should be moderated in case it attracts loss. They learn to equate worth with productivity, love with usefulness, safety with control. No one tells them this directly. It is communicated through urgency in voices, through praise given only for endurance, through subtle disappointment when they slow down. Survival becomes the unspoken standard by which character is measured. And so, even in peaceful moments, the nervous system stays prepared for impact. Over time, this posture shapes identity. Being busy feels normal. Struggle feels familiar. Calm feels suspicious. When life offers ease, there is an internal resistance, a sense that something must be wrong. This is how survival turns into tradition. Not because hardship continues, but because vigilance has become inherited. The family may speak proudly of resilience, of strength, of having endured worse, but rarely pauses to ask what that endurance cost. Emotional presence, softness and rest were postponed for later, yet later never arrived, and the next generation learns that pushing through is admirable, while slowing down feels like failure. What makes this pattern so enduring is that it is often celebrated. The survivor is admired, the one who never complains is respected, the one who carries the weight silently is trusted. Children quickly learn which version of themselves is rewarded. They suppress needs not because they lack them, but because survival values usefulness over expression. They become reliable, capable, and composed, while quietly disconnecting from their own limits. Exhaustion is normalized, emotional distance is reframed as independence, and asking for support feels like weakness rather than wisdom. As these children grow into adults, survival shows up in unexpected ways. They may struggle to relax without guilt, to receive care without discomfort, to enjoy success without immediately searching for the next challenge. Their body remains in a state of readiness long after the threat has passed. Relationships can feel transactional, built on contribution rather than connection. They may pride themselves on self-sufficiency, yet feel an unnameable loneliness that persists even in company. This is the cost of turning survival into a legacy rather than a response. It is important to understand that no one intentionally chose this path. Those who first learned these habits were responding to real conditions. They did what was required to protect themselves and their families. But survival skills are meant to be temporary tools, not permanent identities. When they are never examined, they harden into rules, and rules, when left unquestioned, begin to limit what is possible. The family continues to function, to succeed, to endure, but rarely to exhale. Awareness is the moment tradition loosens its grip. When one person recognizes that the environment has changed, even if the nervous system has not yet caught up. When they question why rest feels uncomfortable, why joy feels excessive, why stillness feels unsafe. These questions are not acts of rejection, they are acts of evolution. To acknowledge that what once kept a family alive may no longer be what allows it to truly live. Breaking this pattern does not require abandoning strength, it requires redefining it. Strength can include rest, discipline can include gentleness, responsibility can include care for the self. The shift is subtle but profound, choosing presence over constant preparedness, allowing ease without apology, trusting that safety does not always require vigilance. This is not forgetting the past, it is honoring it by refusing to remain trapped within it. When survival is released from its throne, space is created for something new, connection deepens, emotions are allowed to surface without urgency. Life is no longer treated as a battlefield, but as a landscape with seasons, some demanding, some gentle. And when one person in a lineage learns to stand without bracing for impact, the tradition changes. Survival becomes wisdom, not identity. Endurance becomes a choice, not a command. And what is passed down next is not just the ability to endure, but the permission to rest. Love taught through fear, not safety. In many families, love is present, but safety is not. Care is provided, responsibilities are met, and appearances are maintained, yet emotional security remains fragile and conditional. Love is offered through guidance, correction, and expectation, rather than warmth and reassurance. From an early age, children sense that approval is something to be earned, not something to rest in. They learn that being loved means being careful, careful with words, careful with emotions, careful not to disappoint. This is how love, though sincere, becomes intertwined with fear, not fear of harm, but fear of withdrawal. Fear that affection can quietly fade when standards are not met. Children raised in such environments grow highly attuned to evaluation. They listen not just to what is said, but to how it is said, searching for shifts in tone that signal approval or disapproval. They learn to anticipate reactions before expressing themselves, adjusting their truth to preserve connection. Love becomes something to manage rather than something to trust. Mistakes feel heavier than they should, not because consequences are severe, but because they threaten belonging. The child's inner world becomes organized around avoiding emotional distance, and safety is replaced by performance. Over time, fear-based love teaches powerful but limiting lessons. It teaches that emotions must be controlled to be acceptable, that vulnerability should be measured, that confidence must not appear as defiance. The child learns to associate emotional expression with risk. Joy must be moderated, sadness must be justified, anger must be buried. What remains visible is the version of the child that fits expectations, composed, capable, agreeable. What remains hidden is the full emotional range that never felt truly welcome. Love continues, but it feels conditional, and conditions quietly shape identity. As these children mature, the lessons travel with them. They become adults who are competent yet cautious, loyal yet restrained. They may struggle to feel fully safe in close relationships, even when there is no threat. Compliments feel uncomfortable. Conflict feels destabilizing. Intimacy feels like something that must be carefully maintained rather than naturally shared. They may over-explain, overachieve, or overgive, hoping to secure what was once uncertain. Fear does not dominate their lives, but it subtly directs them, influencing choices they may not fully understand. This pattern is often mistaken for discipline or high standards. Families may believe they are preparing children for the world by being firm, by emphasizing correction over comfort. And in many ways, these children do become capable. They learn responsibility early. They learn self-control. But capability without safety creates a quiet tension. The child becomes strong on the outside while remaining unsure on the inside. They trust their performance more than their worth. And when life becomes uncertain, they rely on effort rather than connection. What makes fear-based love so enduring is that it rarely appears harmful. There are no obvious signs of neglect. There may be success, stability, and structure. Yet the emotional atmosphere carries an unspoken message. Love must be maintained. And when love feels maintainable, it can also feel losable. This uncertainty follows the child into adulthood, shaping how they attach, how they trust, and how they view themselves when they fall short. Awareness begins when one recognizes the difference between being loved and feeling safe. Love can exist without safety, but safety transforms love into something sustainable. To feel safe is to know that mistakes do not threaten belonging, that emotions do not require justification, that presence does not depend on performance. This realization can be unsettling, especially for those who learned early that approval was earned. It may feel unfamiliar to be accepted without effort. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong, it means new. Breaking this pattern does not require rejecting the love that was given. It requires expanding it. Choosing to add reassurance where there was correction, understanding where there was judgment, patience where there was pressure. It means allowing yourself to feel without immediately editing those feelings. It means practicing emotional honesty in environments that feel safe, even when it feels awkward at first. Safety is not built through perfection. It is built through consistency and presence. When love is no longer taught through fear, something profound shifts. Relationships deepen without constant effort. The body relaxes, the mind quiets, the need to perform softens, and when one person in a lineage learns to offer safety alongside love, to themselves first and then to others, the inheritance changes. Love becomes a place to rest, not a standard to meet, and what is passed down next is not fear disguised as care, but security grounded in understanding. The repetition. No one questions. Every family repeats something. A tone, a role, a way of responding to conflict, closeness, or silence. These repetitions rarely announce themselves as patterns. They feel more like reality itself. They are woven so deeply into daily life that questioning them feels unnecessary, even disloyal. This is how repetition survives, not through force but through familiarity. What is familiar becomes normal, and what is normal is rarely examined. And so, generation after generation, the same emotional movements replay, quietly shaping lives that believe they are choosing freely. Children do not enter families as blank pages, they enter as observers. Long before they understand logic or language, they learn through watching who speaks and who stays quiet, who carries responsibility and who avoids it, who absorbs tension and who releases it. These roles are not assigned with words, they are inherited through presence. One child becomes the peacemaker, another the achiever, another the quiet observer. The roles stabilize the family system, and because they reduce conflict, they are reinforced. No one asks whether the roles are fair, only whether they are effective. As time passes, these roles harden into identity. The peacemaker learns that harmony is their responsibility. The strong one learns that weakness is unacceptable. The dependable one learns that rest must wait. These lessons are not cruel, they are efficient. They keep the family functioning, but efficiency is not the same as health. When roles go unquestioned, they begin to limit growth. The individual adapts so well that the system never has to change. And adaptation, when continuous, becomes invisible self-sacrifice. Repetition also appears in emotional responses. The same conflicts emerge in different forms. The same misunderstandings resurface with new faces. Conversations circle familiar ground without resolution. The family may believe it is dealing with new problems, yet the emotional script remains unchanged. Anger is avoided, vulnerability is redirected, accountability is softened or delayed. The pattern persists, not because no one notices, but because confronting it would require discomfort. And discomfort feels unnecessary when the familiar still functions. What makes repetition powerful is that it feels like choice. Adults often believe they are acting independently, unaware that their reactions were rehearsed long before they understood them. They may repeat parenting styles they once promised to avoid, or relational dynamics they once questioned. Not because they lack awareness, but because stress pulls people back to what is known. Under pressure, the nervous system chooses familiarity over intention, and familiarity often carries the past forward without permission. Over generations, repetition becomes disguised as character. This is just how we are. This is how we show care. This is how we handle things. These statements end conversation before it begins. They protect the pattern from scrutiny, and when patterns are protected, they cannot evolve. The family continues to function but rarely transforms. Growth is postponed in favor of stability, and stability becomes the highest value, even when it costs authenticity. Awareness disrupts repetition gently but firmly. It begins when one person notices the pattern without immediately judging it. When they recognize that repetition is not fate, it is conditioning. This recognition can feel unsettling because it challenges the belief that identity is fixed. It introduces responsibility where there was once habit. And responsibility can feel heavy, but it is also freeing because what is learned can be unlearned and what is repeated can be revised. Breaking repetition does not require dramatic confrontation. It requires conscious pause, choosing a different response when the old one feels automatic, allowing silence where there was once avoidance, speaking calmly where there was once withdrawal or escalation. These small choices may feel insignificant, but they carry generational weight. When one person steps out of their assigned role, the system is forced to adjust, and adjustment, though uncomfortable, creates space for new dynamics to emerge. There is often resistance when repetition is challenged. Familiarity feels safe, even when it is limiting. Others may question the change, not because it is wrong, but because it disrupts balance. This is where clarity becomes essential. Change is not betrayal. Growth is not rejection. Choosing differently does not erase the past. It honors it by refusing to remain bound by it. When repetition is finally questioned, the family story gains a new chapter, one written with awareness rather than assumption, with choice rather than reflex. And when even one person in a lineage decides to respond instead of repeat, the cycle weakens, the pattern loosens, and what is passed down next is no longer unconscious repetition, but intentional presence. The one who breaks the chain. Every family, no matter how entrenched its patterns, eventually produces one individual who feels the weight more clearly than the rest. This person may not be the loudest or the strongest, but they are often the most aware. They sense that something unspoken is being carried forward, something heavy that does not belong to the present moment. While others move comfortably within familiar roles, this person feels a quiet resistance inside, a question that refuses to disappear. They are not trying to rebel, they are trying to understand. And in that understanding, the chain begins to loosen. The one who breaks the chain is often misunderstood. Awareness can look like distance. Reflection can look like withdrawal. Choosing differently can be interpreted as disloyalty. When patterns have gone unquestioned for generations, questioning them can feel threatening. This individual may be told they are overthinking, too sensitive, or unnecessarily cautious. Yet sensitivity is not the problem, it is the instrument. It is through heightened perception that patterns become visible. What others call discomfort is often clarity arriving before language can catch up. This path is rarely chosen deliberately. It emerges from accumulation, from moments that no longer make sense, from reactions that feel inherited rather than authentic, from an inner tension that grows stronger with time. The chain breaker begins to notice how certain responses feel automatic but hollow, how certain expectations feel heavy rather than grounding. They realize that familiarity is not the same as truth, and this realization, once formed, cannot be undone.